When I think back to early 2019, I can't believe how a simple swipe on a dating app turned into losing everything I'd spent 35 years building. I never saw myself as the kind of man who would hand over his passport and life savings to someone he'd known for 3 months. I was careful, practical, always the one who read the fine print. But it turns out even the most cautious people can get swept into something they don't understand. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't even particularly romantic. But I had $237,000 saved up and thought that would be enough to give me a comfortable retirement after years of working in the brutal cold of Alaska's oil fields. I thought I'd finally earned the right to feel warm, both in temperature and in life. The Philippines promised both. Loretta promised both. And for a while, I believed I'd actually found what I was looking for. By the time I realized what was really happening, my passport was locked in a safe I couldn't access, my bank accounts were nearly empty, and I was trapped in a country where I had no legal rights to anything I'd paid for. This is how it all fell apart. I was 58 when my marriage finally ended. I'd spent 32 years in Anchorage, Alaska, just going through the motions, working on the North Slope oil rigs for 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, watching my life pass by in shifts. I felt like I was pretty boring, really. I came home to an empty house, ate dinner alone, watched television, and repeated it all again. I was invisible. I had $237,000 saved up, although it wasn't a fortune, but I felt optimistic about the future. I'd worked those brutal shifts for 35 years, lived frugally, never took expensive vacations, and managed to squirrel away everything I could into my retirement accounts and savings. My pension would kick in at 62 with about $2,800 a month, but I had 2 years to figure out what to do before then. I got married back in 1987. We went on to have 2 kids. My marriage was functional at best, cold at worst. We stopped talking to each other somewhere around 1998, but stayed together because neither of us had the energy to leave. When she finally filed for divorce in 2017, I didn't fight it. She wanted the house, and I let her have it. I was tired. By the time 2018 came around, I was 58 and completely worn out from decades of a life that felt like it was happening to someone else. I'd heard people talk about the Philippines, how the cost of living was lower, how life could be easier, and how a man could start fresh. I let myself believe it because I wanted something like that to be true so badly. I'd spent my entire adult life in a place where winter lasted 8 months, where I couldn't afford to heat my small apartment properly, and where nobody seemed to notice I existed. The idea of living somewhere warm, somewhere affordable, somewhere I might actually matter to someone, it consumed me. By the time 2019 came around, I started thinking, why was I even staying in Alaska? I could take early retirement at 60. I had enough saved to live comfortably somewhere cheaper. I could have a nice place, maybe even a girlfriend who actually wanted to be around me, and I could be respected for once instead of just being another aging oilfield worker nobody remembered. I joined a dating site called Filipino Cupid in January 2019. I forgot the exact name at first, but it was clear that there were more girls on there than guys, and it was quite interesting to receive messages from girls in their early 20s and 30s saying they wanted a serious relationship with someone just like me. At first, I thought it was some kind of scam. Why would attractive young women be interested in a 5'8" man with weathered skin and gray hair? I got it that they came from a poor background and needed financial support. I get they wanted a better life, but I wanted a better life as well. And by being with someone like that, I thought I would have a better life. I wasn't looking for someone to take care of me. I was looking for companionship, someone to share my time with, someone who might actually be happy to see me at the end of the day. Before long, I started talking to one girl who was from Cebu City. She was only 29 years old, but it was as if she completely looked past my age and appearance and looked at who I was inside as a person. Her name was Loretta. She worked at a bar in Cebu, nothing fancy, just serving drinks to tourists and locals. She told me right away about her situation. She had a 6-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. The father wasn't around, and she was doing everything she could to provide for her child while living with her mother and 2 sisters in a cramped apartment. We messaged every single day for weeks. She'd send me good morning messages when she woke up, which was my evening in Alaska. We'd video call when she got home from work. She'd show me around her neighborhood, introduce me to her daughter on camera, tell me about her, dreams of opening a small sorry store someday so she wouldn't have to work at the bar anymore. She seemed genuine. She seemed like she actually cared about getting to know me, not just what I could give her. It only took me 6 weeks to decide to go and see her. I booked a ticket for March 2019, telling myself it was just a visit, just to see if the connection we had online translated to real life. But deep down, I think I already knew I was going to stay. When I called my daughter and told her that I met someone online and she's actually younger than you, I could hear her sigh as if to say, "Here we go, Dad." She didn't say it directly, but I could hear it in her voice. She asked how long I'd known this person. 6 weeks. She asked if we'd met in person yet. Not yet. She asked if this woman had asked for money. Not directly, but Loretta had mentioned her struggles. My daughter told me to be careful, that I deserved to be happy, but that I should protect myself. I didn't want to hear it, and told her I was just visiting, that I wasn't making any big decisions yet, but I already had. I'd already decided in my mind that this was my chance. When you spend decades feeling invisible, and suddenly someone sees you, really sees you, you don't want to question it too much. You just want to believe it's real. When I met Loretta, I was 58 and she was 29. I'll admit there was an age gap, but she said she didn't care. She said that age was just a number, that what mattered was how someone treated you, how they made you feel. In a way, I felt like she was the more experienced of the two of us. She'd been through a relationship that left her a single mother. She'd worked hard jobs. She'd struggled in ways I never had. I felt like maybe I was the naive one, not her. Part of me knew what the game was in the Philippines. I'd read the stories online, the forums where expats warned each other about bar girls and scams and women who disappeared after getting what they wanted. But I chose to ignore it. I told myself Loretta was different. She had a real job. She had a daughter she was raising. She wasn't asking me for money, at least not yet. I wanted so badly for this to be real that I convinced myself it was. For the first 2 weeks I was in Cebu, everything was incredible. We met for lunch during her breaks from work, walked along the waterfront at night, visited her family who welcomed me warmly, and spent hours just talking about our futures. I found myself opening up to her more than I expected, telling her about my failed marriage, my boring life in Alaska, my dreams of retiring somewhere I could finally enjoy my life. After dating for just over a month, that's when we decided to take things further. Loretta was traveling over an hour each way to work at the bar, paying for a shared room in her mother's apartment with her daughter, and barely making 8,000 pesos a month, which was only about $150. It seemed ridiculous that she was working so hard for so little when I was right there, able to help. She moved into the small condo I was renting in Cebu City, a 1-bedroom place in Mabolo that cost me $400 a month. She was working at the bar and making around 8,000 to 10,000 pesos depending on tips. I agreed to send $300 a month to support her daughter, who stayed with Loretta's mother while Loretta lived with me. I felt like this was a fair amount, and it made sense. Her daughter needed school supplies, food, clothing. Loretta's mother was caring for her, so the money went to support both of them. It didn't feel like I was being taken advantage of. It felt like I was building a family, something I'd lost when my marriage ended. I was happy to make those changes because a part of me always was looking for a connection and to have someone to go home to in the evenings. We'd cook dinner together in the small condo kitchen, watch Filipino soap operas that I didn't understand but enjoyed anyway, walk to the nearby mall on weekends. She'd hold my hand in public, introduce me to her friends, call me her boyfriend with what seemed like genuine pride. She was affectionate, attentive, always asking if I needed anything, if I was happy, if I felt at home in Cebu. After we had lived together for 2 months, I had to pull the trigger and ask her to marry me. I wanted to take things further with her, and I felt like she would want the same, which she did. I didn't do anything fancy, just asked her one evening while we were sitting on the small balcony of our condo, looking out over the city lights. She cried, hugged me, said yes immediately, and we decided to get married, both excited about it. We planned a small ceremony at the City Hall for May 2019, just 3 months after I'd first arrived in the Philippines. After things went smoothly for our first 3 months of marriage, it only seemed logical to look for a condo to buy. I wasn't about to rush into things, though. And first things first, let's just buy one condo. We didn't need anything massive, just a decent 1-bedroom or studio in a good location that we could either live in or rent out for passive income. We looked around Cebu City, focusing on areas like IT Park, Lahug, and near Ayala Center, where rental demand seemed strong. I researched everything carefully, checking occupancy rates in different buildings, talking to other expats about their investment experiences, looking at comparable units for rent to estimate what kind of income we could generate. After looking around for about a month, I settled on one condo in a building near IT Park that seemed to offer everything I was looking for. It was a studio unit, 24 square meters, unfurnished but well-maintained building with decent amenities. I looked at similar units for rent in the same building, going for 15,000 to 18,000 pesos a month, checked the occupancy rates, which seemed good, and calculated rental yields. And after all the research I did, it seemed like it was a good price and we should be able to rent it out and make a return of around 6 to 7% annually. The unit cost $43,000. I sold $45,000 worth of my index funds and ETFs that I'd been building in my retirement accounts, took the tax hit, and purchased that first condo. The plan was simple: furnish it minimally, find a tenant, and use the rental income to cover the condo fees and generate a small profit. Within 3 weeks, we had a tenant, a young professional working in IT Park, who signed a 1-year lease at 16,000 pesos a month. It seemed like it was working exactly as planned. After 6 months went smoothly, it only seemed logical to look for another one, and we found one that was equally as good in a newer building near Ayala Center. Slightly bigger at 28 square meters, better finishes, higher rental potential, but I wanted to buy it, and unfortunately the foreign quota had already been filled. Buildings in the Philippines can only sell 40% of their units to foreigners, and this particular building had already reached that limit. I should have looked for somewhere else, but my wife said, "Buy it in my name," which I probably shouldn't have done, but I did. We purchased that second condo for $52,000, putting it entirely in Loretta's name. I rationalized it by telling myself we were married, that legally her property was my property under Philippine law, that it didn't really matter whose name was on the title. We were building our future together. She'd never given me any reason not to trust her. She'd been faithful, loving, supportive. Why wouldn't I put property in her name if it meant we could expand our investment portfolio? Looking back, that was the moment I should have stopped and reconsidered. That was the moment where I crossed the line from protecting my assets to putting everything at risk. But I didn't see it that way at the time. I saw it as progress. I saw it as building something real. I saw it as proof that our relationship was working and that my retirement plan was taking shape exactly as I'd hoped. 8 months into our marriage, Loretta said we should buy a car. Her reasoning made sense at the time. We were taking taxis everywhere, spending 300 to 500 pesos every time we went anywhere, dealing with the hassle of waiting for rides in the heat. She said it would be more convenient, more comfortable, and in the long run, probably cheaper than constantly paying for transportation. She'd just gotten her driver's license and seemed excited about the independence it would give us. I looked at it and researched what kind of vehicle made sense for Cebu. I wasn't about to buy something brand new and expensive. The thing was, A reliable used car would give us the freedom to travel around Cebu and even drive to other parts of Visayas without depending on buses and vans. I found a 2015 Toyota Vios with 60,000 kilometers on it, well-maintained, single owner, all service records available. It cost $8,500. I used cash from my savings account in Alaska and had it wired to my Philippine bank account to purchase the car. Like the second condo, the car had to be registered in Loretta's name since I was a foreigner, and vehicle ownership rules made it complicated for me to register it myself. At the time, this seemed like just a practical formality, not a warning sign. Things seemed okay at first. We drove around Cebu, took weekend trips to Moalboal to go diving, visited her family in their province more easily. The car was useful, no question about it. The first few months went well, and I felt like we were building the comfortable retirement life I'd always imagined. 10 months later, Loretta's mother got sick, or at least that's what I was told. She needed surgery for what was described as a serious stomach problem, something that required hospitalization and an operation that would cost 120,000 pesos, about $2,300. I'd been sending the $300 a month for Loretta's daughter faithfully, never missing a payment, never complaining. But this was different. This was an emergency, a one-time thing, or so I thought. I looked at it and thought about refusing, but the guilt of letting my wife's mother suffer when I had the money to help was overwhelming. I rationalized it by telling myself this was what family did, that I was part of this family now, that helping with medical emergencies was just part of life. I wired $2,500 to cover the surgery and hospital stay. 3 months after that, there was another emergency. Loretta's sister needed money to prevent her from losing her small business, a street food stall that was apparently failing. The amount requested was 80,000 pesos, about $1,550. Then 2 months later, the roof of her mother's house needed emergency repairs after a typhoon, another $1,200. Then Loretta's daughter needed money for a school trip and new uniform and supplies, another $400. Every time, though, she brought it up, I said I was going to say no, but she just kept pushing and pushing. She'd explain how important it was, how her family was counting on us, how embarrassing it would be if we didn't help, how it would look like I didn't really care about her or her family. I couldn't bear the thought of having a miserable woman next to me ruining my life, making every day tense and uncomfortable, so I gave in. Before we were married, Loretta never asked for anything from me. She was happy and content just being able to spend time together, eat simple meals, watch movies on my laptop. But when we were married, I could feel like she was more comfortable, but not comfortable in a positive way. Comfortable in a negative way, comfortable asking for more, comfortable expecting me to solve every financial problem her family had, comfortable treating my savings like it was an unlimited resource that existed to support not just us, but her entire extended family. By this point, I'd already spent $109,500 on the 2 condos, $8,500 on the car, and approximately $7,800 in family support requests. Beyond the regular $300 monthly payments, I had $111,200 remaining of my original $237,000. I told myself $2,000 a month would be enough for us to live on comfortably, but within 6 months of getting married, it was closer to $3,200. And no matter how many times I looked at the figures, I couldn't explain where it was all going. It was becoming clear that my budget was condo fees for 2 units, $180, month rent for our own apartment, $400, monthly support for daughter, $300, month, utilities and basics, $400, month, Loretta's personal expenses, nails, hair, beauty treatments, shopping, $500, month family emergencies, $600, $800, month average food and entertainment, $600 month car maintenance and gas. $200 month. One evening, I sat her down and told her it couldn't go on like this, that the budget was $2,500 and there was no more. I tried to make it sound firm but fair, and I told her that if we wanted to have any kind of future together, we had to stick to it. My pension wouldn't start for another year, and we were burning through my savings faster than I'd ever planned. She nodded and didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't happy. Her face had this expression that I'd started to see more often, this subtle disappointment, like I was letting her down by not being willing to spend more. Every request after that turned into an argument, every peso questioned, and I found myself second-guessing whether I was the one being unreasonable. She'd say things like, "You have so much money and you won't even help my mother?" Or, "Other foreigners help their wife's family. Why are you different?" Or, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't make me beg for this." The guilt was overwhelming. We lived in Cebu City in our rented apartment in Mabolo. Our routine was fairly settled by this point. Loretta didn't work anymore since I'd essentially replaced her income with my financial support, so she spent her days taking care of the apartment, visiting her family, occasionally checking on the condos we owned. I was starting to enjoy it, the slower pace of life, the warm weather, the ability to walk to nearby restaurants and cafes without needing to bundle up in winter gear. Cebu itself was busy, modern in some areas, chaotic in others. Traffic was insane, pollution was noticeable, but the energy of the city felt alive in a way that Alaska never did. But when we went to Loretta's home province in southern Cebu, about 2 hours away by car, I felt genuinely peaceful. The beaches were beautiful, the pace was slow, her family was welcoming, and I could see myself retiring there eventually, maybe building a small house near the water. One thing I noticed very quickly being in the Philippines was how communal family was. Nobody lived alone. Grandparents, parents, children, aunts, uncles, cousins, all lived together or very close by. Everyone shared resources, everyone helped each other, and there was an expectation that if you had money, you supported those who didn't. It was beautiful in theory, but in practice, it meant I was expected to be the financial safety net for not just Loretta and her daughter, but her entire extended family. I learned some basic Tagalog and Cebuano phrases, enough to be polite and navigate daily life. I got to know some other expats in Cebu, guys in similar situations, most of them married to Filipinas, most of them supporting their wives' families to varying degrees. We'd meet for coffee or beers sometimes, and they'd share stories that sounded uncomfortably familiar to my own. But I told myself my situation was different, that Loretta genuinely loved me, that we were building something real. But underneath, I already knew I was caught in something I just couldn't pull myself out of. The money was draining faster than I'd planned. Loretta was changing from the sweet, grateful woman I'd met online into someone who seemed constantly dissatisfied, and I was starting to feel isolated. Most of my time was spent with her family or alone in the apartment while she went out with friends. I didn't have my own social circle. I didn't have my own life separate from her. I was dependent on her in ways I hadn't anticipated. By this point, we'd been married for 14 months, and I'd already spent $125,800. I had $111,200 remaining, which sounds like a lot, but when I did the math on how quickly it was disappearing, I started to panic. My original plan was to live on $2,000 a month and make my savings last until my pension kicked in at age 62, which would have given me over 8 years of comfortable living. But reality was very different. I told myself $2,000 a month would be enough, but within a year of getting married, it was closer to $3,500 when I averaged everything out. And no matter how many times I looked at the figures, I couldn't explain where it was all going. The rental income from the first condo covered its own fees and gave us about $80 a month profit, but that was barely anything. The second condo still hadn't found a long-term tenant and was just sitting empty, costing us money every month in association dues. It was breaking down to fixed costs, rent, condo fees, support for daughter, $880 month, variable costs, utilities, food, transportation, $850 month. Loretta's personal spending I'd stopped tracking exactly, but it was substantial. $700 month. Family requests, now happening almost weekly, $800 month. Unexpected expenses, always something, $400 month. And nights where I gave in when I didn't want to, adding another $300 here, $500 there. Usually after arguments where Loretta would cry or give me the silent treatment until I agreed. One evening, I sat her down and told her it couldn't go on like this, that the budget was $2,500 and there was no more. I tried to make it sound firm but fair, and I told her that if we wanted to have any kind of future together, we had to stick to it. I showed her the spreadsheet I'd been keeping, the numbers that didn't lie, the trajectory that showed we'd be broke within 3 years if we didn't change course. She nodded and didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't happy. Her mouth smiled, but her eyes didn't. She said she understood, that she'd try to spend less, that she'd talk to her family about reducing requests. But I knew from her tone that nothing was going to change. Every request after that turned into an argument. Every peso questioned, and I found myself second-guessing whether I was the one being unreasonable. She'd compare me to other foreign husbands, tell me about how her friend's American husband just bought his wife's family a new house, how another expat had sent his wife's brother to university. She'd make me feel cheap, selfish, like I was failing as a husband because I wasn't willing to spend unlimited money on people I barely knew. The guilt manipulation was sophisticated. She never demanded directly. She just expressed disappointment, sadness, worry about her family's well-being. She'd wonder aloud what her family thought of me, whether they respected me, whether they thought I was a good husband to her. And slowly, piece by piece, my resistance would crumble and I'd transfer another $1,000 to solve whatever the latest crisis was. Things did change after we got married in a way I wasn't expecting. Before we were married, Loretta never asked for anything from me. She was happy and content just being able to spend time together, eat simple meals, walk around the city. But when we got married, I could feel like she was more comfortable asking, more comfortable expecting, more comfortable taking. My wife went to her province by herself for the first time about 15 months into our marriage, and this was when I started to wonder if there perhaps was something she was hiding from me. Anytime she went anywhere by herself before, she always used to answer the phone immediately. We had an agreement together that if one of us called the other, we had to pick up straight away. It was her rule, actually, implemented early in our relationship because she wanted to make sure I wasn't talking to other women online. However, when she went to her province by herself this time, she was very difficult to contact. I'd call her in the afternoon and the phone would ring and ring, no answer. I'd message her on Facebook Messenger, and the message would sit there unread for hours. When she finally did respond, her excuses were always variations of the same themes. Going with her family somewhere with no signal, accidentally leaving the phone at the house while she went to help her mother at the market, no battery on the phone because of an electrical issue in the province, no signal in the area, because they were visiting relatives in the mountains. At first, I tried to ask her about it gently, expressing concern rather than accusation. She brushed it off, seemed annoyed that I was questioning her, told me I was being paranoid and controlling. I chose to let it go because I didn't want to start a fight and ruin her trip, but the feeling in my gut didn't go away. When she went to the province again 3 weeks later, the same pattern repeated, unreachable for hours at a time, delayed responses, vague explanations. At this point, I was definitely sure there was something going on. I didn't know what exactly, but my mind went to the obvious places. Was there someone else? An old boyfriend? Someone from her past she was reconnecting with? I started noticing other changes too. She was on her phone constantly when she was home, but she'd angle the screen away from me. She'd smile while typing messages, then quickly close the app when I walked into the room. She started going out more with friends, coming home later, sometimes smelling like she'd been drinking more than she admitted. When I asked about her day, her answers became vaguer, less detailed, more defensive. Her interest in physical intimacy declined sharply. We went from being close several times a week to maybe once every 2 weeks. And when it did happen, she seemed distracted, like she was just going through the motions to keep me satisfied. She stopped initiating anything, stopped dressing up for me, stopped making an effort in the small ways that used to make me feel wanted. And then there was the money situation becoming more aggressive. Before, requests came with elaborate explanations and emotional appeals. Now, they came with expectations and irritation, if I hesitated. My sister needs 50,000 pesos for her son's hospitalization. Not a request, a statement, an expectation that I would immediately transfer the money without question. When I asked for details, for medical documents, for proof that this was real, she'd accuse me of not trusting her family, of being a typical foreigner who thought all Filipinos were scammers. The woman I'd married was disappearing, and someone harder, colder, more calculating was taking her place. Or maybe this was who she'd always been, and I was just finally seeing it clearly. I wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. The trust was broken, even though I didn't have concrete proof of anything yet. I just knew something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played in ways I hadn't even discovered yet. Our daily interactions became strained. Conversations were surface level. We existed in the same apartment but felt miles apart emotionally. I was quite friendly with one expat who was in a similar situation, married to a Filipina, living in Cebu, dealing with financial pressure from the extended family. His name was George, Australian guy, maybe 62 years old, been in the Philippines for 5 years. And when I told him I'd bought 2 condos and put one in my wife's name, I remember him just shaking his head saying, "Mare, you've made a critical mistake. If it's not in your name, it's not yours. Doesn't matter if you're married, doesn't matter what she promises you. I got no legal claim to that property." I just didn't want to hear it though. I defended Loretta, defended my decision, told George that my situation was different, that my wife wasn't like that. He just smiled sadly and said, "They all say that, brother. Good luck." By the time our second anniversary rolled around in May 2021, I'd spent $142,300 total. I knew I couldn't keep living like this anymore. I had $94,700 left. My pension still hadn't started, and at the current burn rate, I'd be broke within 2.5 years. I had to do something. I had to either fix the relationship and get the spending under control, or I had to get out before I lost everything. I tried to sit down with Loretta and have a serious conversation about our future, about the budget, about the changes I'd noticed in her behavior. I wanted to address it calmly, rationally, like adults who supposedly loved each other. But the conversation immediately became defensive on her part. She accused me of not appreciating everything she did for me, not understanding Filipino culture, being cheap and controlling. She cried, saying she never should have married me if I was going to treat her like this, monitoring every peso, questioning her family's needs. It only made things worse. She didn't see a problem with the spending. She saw a problem with me not being willing to spend more. I couldn't believe I'd let this happen. Every day I felt more trapped in a situation I couldn't fix and couldn't escape from without massive financial loss. The condos I'd bought were in her name or tied up in tenancies. The car was hers legally. The apartment was a joint lease. My passport was in the safe in our bedroom, and while I could access it theoretically, she'd started making comments about how our important documents should be kept secure, and she'd changed the combination without telling me the new one. That should have been a massive red flag, but I rationalized it as her being organized and protective of our paperwork. I was 60 years old, living in a country where I had no legal rights to anything I'd paid for, married to a woman who was clearly hiding something from me, and watching my retirement savings evaporate faster than I ever imagined possible. 3 months after our second anniversary, in August 2021, I decided to take a chance and check her phone while she was in the shower. I rationalized it by telling myself I needed to know, that I had a right to know what was happening with my own life and my own money. My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone from the bedside table. I tried her passcode. She'd told me once it was her daughter's birthday, but that didn't work. I tried a few variations. Nothing. Then I remembered seeing her type it in once and realized it was a pattern, not a number. I tried to recreate the pattern from memory, and somehow, incredibly, it worked. The phone unlocked. I went straight to Facebook Messenger. There were dozens of conversations, but one name kept appearing at the top, marked as a favorite. A man's name I didn't recognize. I opened the conversation and started scrolling, my heart pounding so hard I thought she'd hear it over the running water in the bathroom. The messages went back months, long before her first solo trip to the province. They were in a mix of Tagalog and English, but I understood enough. Miss you too, baby. Can't wait to see you again. Don't worry, he doesn't suspect anything. He thinks I'm visiting my mother, haha. Did he send more money? We need it for the house. How much longer do you think before we have enough? I scrolled further, feeling sick. There were photos of Loretta and this man together, at the beach, at a restaurant, in what looked like a bedroom. Photos from her recent trip to the province. Photos from months ago. I kept scrolling, finding more devastating details. Messages about me specifically. He's so stupid. He'll give me anything if I cry. Enough. Financial planning. We have almost 2 million pesos saved now. Just need a bit more for the lot. References to the condos. He bought another one in my name. I told you he would. Mocking my appearance and age. He's old and boring, but the money is good. The look on her face when she walked out of the bathroom in her towel and saw me sitting on the bed with her phone in my hand was that of sheer terror. Not sadness, not guilt, not remorse. Terror. She immediately tried to grab the phone from me, but I pulled it away. Who is he? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm despite the rage building inside me. She went silent first, just staring at me, calculating her next move. Then she tried denial. It's not what it looks like, she said. He's just an old friend. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice getting louder. I read everything. You've been with him this whole time. You've been planning this with him. The money, the properties, everything. She started crying then, but it felt calculated, rehearsed. I'm sorry, she said. I made a mistake. It doesn't mean anything. I love you. How long? I demanded. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, then admitted. Since before we got married. We were together for 3 years before you. When I met you online, we were taking a break. But then he came back and said he wanted to be together again, and I didn't know what to do. So you married me for my money while staying with him? It's not like that, she said, her tears turning to anger now. You don't understand Filipino culture. You don't understand how hard life is here. I needed security. I needed to take care of my daughter, my family. You had money and he didn't, but I loved him. And the condos, the car, all the money for your family? She looked away. Some of it went to my family, but we've been saving most of it. We were going to buy land in his province and build a house. That was always the plan. Once your money ran out, or once you got too old to notice, I was going to leave and be with him. The truth finally revealed itself in its full ugliness. For nearly 2.5 years, I'd been nothing but a funding source for her actual life with someone else. Every kiss was a lie. Every I love you was a transaction. Every moment of supposed happiness was an act designed to keep the money flowing. By the time this conversation happened in August 2021, I looked at my account and did the math with a level of clarity I should have had years earlier. Opening amount. I had started with $237,000 when I moved to the Philippines in March 2019. Itemized losses. Investment 1, IT Park condo, $43,000. Investment 2, when her name, $52,000. Investment 3, Toyota Vios, in her name, $8,500. Monthly support for daughter, $300 times 29 months equals $8,700. Family emergency requests, $18,600. Documented transactions. Monthly living expenses, average $3,200 times 29 months equals $92,800. Miscellaneous and cash gifts, $6,400. Total spent, $230,000. What remained? Savings left in Alaska bank, $7,000 cash in Philippine bank, $1,200. Property I legally owned. The IT Park condo only, in my name. Income, $0. Pension wouldn't start for another 7 months. What was recoverable? When I tried to assess what I could actually get back, the picture was grim. The IT Park condo I legally owned might sell for $40,000 if I was lucky and found a buyer quickly, but after agent fees and transaction costs, I'd net maybe $37,000. The Ayala condo that was in Loretta's name? I had no legal claim to it whatsoever. The car? Also hers legally. All the money sent to family? Gone. And likely much of it had gone straight into a joint account with her boyfriend. I'd lost approximately $200,000 of accessible value. Even if I sold the one condo I owned, I'd still be down $163,000 from my starting point, with only $45,000 total to my name and no income for 7 months. I'd spent 2.5 years of my life building what I thought was a future with someone I loved and had $8,200 in the bank over and above what was tied up in the one property I could legally claim. What a nightmare it was. The fact that Loretta had told me straight to my face that she was saving my money to build a house with her boyfriend instead of just being honest that she needed help with family, I'd have probably gone along with some of it. But she went behind my back and basically stole my money for 2.5 years while sleeping with another man and planning a future that didn't include me. Everything I'd paid for was in her name. Ayala condo, worth approximately $50,000. Toyota Vios, worth approximately $7,000. Total value she kept, $57,000. I had no legal claim over any of it, other than the fact it belonged to my wife. But did I really want her to be my wife now after what I'd learned? Could I even divorce her without losing the one condo I had left? Philippine divorce law was complicated, and as a foreigner, I had very limited options. The emotional weight of the revelation was crushing. I'd traded away the last good years of my life for absolutely nothing. I'd been nothing but a convenient ATM for a woman who was planning her real life with someone else the entire time. And the worst part was, I'd seen the warning signs and chosen to ignore every single one of them. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was chaotic. I didn't storm out that night because I literally had nowhere to go. The apartment lease was in both our names. Most of my identification and documents were in the safe I couldn't open. I didn't have enough cash on hand to just book a hotel for an extended period. I was trapped, at least temporarily. The first night after discovering everything was unbearable. We slept in the same bed but as far apart as possible. She tried to start a conversation several times, but I couldn't even look at her. The next morning, I told her I needed to access the safe to get my passport and important documents. She initially refused, saying we needed to talk things through first, which confirmed my suspicion that my passport was being held hostage. I told her directly, "Open the safe now, or I'm calling the police and reporting that you're holding my passport illegally." I didn't know if that would actually work, but it was enough of a threat that she reluctantly opened it. My passport was there, along with the condo titles, car registration, and our marriage certificate. I took my passport and the title to the IT Park condo immediately and put them in my shoulder bag that I didn't let out of my sight for the next several days. She tried to reconcile over the following days. She apologized constantly, cried, explained that she really did care about me, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that the relationship with the other man was over now, that she wanted to make our marriage work. She'd hug me, try to kiss me, promise she'd never do it again, that she'd be a better wife. But I could see right through it. She was panicking because her income source was about to disappear. If I left, she'd lose the monthly support, the comfortable apartment, the potential for future money. Her apologies weren't about love. They were about financial preservation. Her tactics changed when she realized the emotional approach wasn't working. She started making threats, subtle at first, then more direct. If you divorce me, I'll make sure you never see a peso from that condo. I'll tell everyone you abused me. I'll make your life in the Philippines impossible. She told me I couldn't just leave, that we were married, that she had rights, that I owed her support under Philippine law. I just told her it's already over. She could keep the Ayala condo, keep the car, keep everything that was in her name. But our marriage was finished. I needed time to figure out my next steps, but I made it clear I was done being manipulated. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked on an exit strategy. My idea was to stay calm, avoid giving her any reason to escalate things legally or physically, and quietly prepare to leave the Philippines and return to Alaska. I needed to be strategic because I was still 7 months away from my pension starting, which meant I needed to survive on the $8,200 I had until my monthly income began. 3 weeks after the discovery, Loretta went to stay with her family in the province, supposedly to give us space. I suspected she was actually going to be with her boyfriend, but I didn't care anymore. While she was gone, I moved my belongings out of the apartment, stored the few things I wanted to keep with George, the Australian expat, and prepared to leave the Philippines. She came back a week later, and when she saw that I'd moved my things out, she finally understood I was serious. She showed up at George's place where I was temporarily staying, crying, begging, then screaming when begging didn't work. She accused me of ruining her life, of being a typical foreign user who takes advantage of Filipina women, of abandoning her and her daughter after promising to take care of them. I told her one final time, "You made your choices. You can have the condo in your name, the car, everything else. But I'm done. Consider this your payment for 2.5 years of pretending to love me." When she realized I was serious and nothing would change my mind, she finally left. She sent threatening messages for a few days, then went silent. I later learned from a mutual friend that she'd moved into the Ayala condo with her boyfriend almost immediately after I left. Leaving the Philippines felt like both an escape and a defeat. At the airport in Cebu, waiting for my flight back to Anchorage via Manila, I looked around at all the other foreign men with Filipina girlfriends and wives, wondering how many of them were in the same situation I'd been in, just not aware of it yet. Part of me wanted to warn them. Part of me knew they wouldn't listen, just like I hadn't listened to the warnings I'd received. The flight home felt like punishment. Not for the money I'd lost, but for all the time I'd wasted convincing myself everything was real when every rational part of my brain knew it wasn't. Back in Anchorage in September 2021, I had no choice but to start over from the bottom. My house had been sold in the divorce years earlier, so I couldn't return there. I had no family nearby. My daughter lived in Washington State with her own family. I stayed with George's brother, who also lived in Anchorage for the first month while I figured out my situation. My new reality was harsh. Living situation. Rented a small studio apartment in a rough part of Anchorage for $800 month. Financial situation. $45,000 total, including the $37,000 I'd eventually get from selling the IT Park condo, which took 4 months to sell. Work situation. At 60 years old, with health issues from decades of oil field work, I couldn't return to the rigs. I got a part-time job at a hardware store making $15 hour, working 25 hours a week. Age factor. Too old to start a real career again. Physically unable to do the work I'd done for 35 years. Forced to survive on part-time minimum wage work until my pension started. I'm 60 years old, living in a studio apartment in Alaska where winter lasts most of the year, and only $375 a week from part-time work to live on until my pension starts. You can't live on that. You should be able to, but you can't. Once my pension started in April 2022, I'd have $2,800 a month, which was survivable but nothing like the comfortable retirement I'd planned. The anger has never left me, and the bitterness stayed in everything I did, and all I could think was that I traded away the last chance I had for something that was never real in the first place. I should have been living comfortably in the Philippines, or at least living comfortably somewhere warm with enough money to enjoy my retirement. Instead, I was back in the cold, working a job meant for teenagers, living paycheck to paycheck, and facing the reality that this was probably how the rest of my life would look. The specific resentments kept me awake at night. I gave her everything and she gave me nothing but lies. The lies that hurt most weren't even about the boyfriend. They were about all the fake emergencies her family supposedly had. The disrespect of stealing my money to build a house with another man while sleeping next to me every night. I always think back to what I did and the time I had there with her. And if only she'd been honest with me from the start, if only she'd told me she needed help supporting herself while she was with someone else, I probably would have walked away immediately and saved myself $200,000 in 2.5 years. But she made the choice to deceive me completely, and I hate her for it. I hate myself more, but I hate the fact that she showed absolutely no remorse, even when caught. That she, if I could do it over, I would change everything. Never put property in someone else's name. No matter how married you are, no matter how much you trust them, if property isn't in your name in the Philippines, it's not yours. Period. Set firm financial boundaries from the start. The first time she asked for money beyond what we'd agreed on, I should have said no and stuck to it. The moment you show you'll give in when pushed, the pushing never stops. Listen when family and friends warn you. My daughter saw the red flags immediately. George warned me explicitly. Other expats shared their stories. I ignored all of it because I wanted to believe I was different. Don't ignore red flags, the unreturned calls, the mysterious trips, the increasing financial demands, the behavior changes. Every single warning sign was there, and I saw them all. I just chose to rationalize each one instead of accepting what they meant. Keep emergency money separate. I should have kept at least $50,000 in a separate account that she didn't know about, that I never touched, that would have given me an escape route if things went bad. I'm older now. I'm 63 as of 2024. I'm still working part-time at the hardware store to supplement my pension because $2,800 a month isn't quite enough, especially with inflation. I'm still living in the same studio apartment in Anchorage. My health isn't great, the cold bothers my joints. The decades of physical labor caught up with me, and I can't afford the kind of health care I probably need. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. The fact that I still have enough to live on and eventually my pension will be my full income when I stop working at 65, that's got to be good enough for me. I compare my situation to other guys I've heard about who lost literally everything, who ended up homeless or had to move back in with family in their 60 seconds and 70 seconds, who got trapped in the Philippines with no money and no way home. At least I got out. At least I still have something. On paper, I'm still married. We never officially divorced because the process in the Philippines is expensive and complicated, and I didn't have the money or energy to pursue it. Yet, I've been assured by my lawyer friend that because I'm back in the US and she hasn't contacted me in years, there's no legal risk to the remaining assets I have. She got what she wanted, the condo and car in the Philippines. I got my freedom, or what's left of it. I'm still living in Anchorage, Alaska. Same studio apartment I moved into when I returned in 2021. It's small, about 400 square feet, in a building that's seen better days, but it's affordable, and I've made it as comfortable as I can on a limited budget. Winter is still brutal here, but at least I'm not pretending to be happy in a fake marriage anymore. My current financial snapshot is stable, if modest. Savings, $52,000, slowly rebuilt from the $45,000 I had when I returned, mostly from living extremely frugally and working constantly. Monthly income, $2,800 from Social Security pension, plus about $600 from part-time work, equals $3,400 divided by month. Property owned, none debt, $0. I started with $237,000, which would have given me a comfortable retirement generating passive income and covering all my expenses with room to spare. But I don't think you can look back at things and wonder too hard what would have been if I did things differently. That way leads to madness. I have to accept the reality I'm living in now and make the best of it. My daily life now is simple and repetitive. I work 3 days a week at the hardware store, helping customers find supplies, restocking shelves, operating the register. I spend time reading at the public library to save on heating costs in my apartment. I cook all my meals at home, shopping carefully for sales and cheap staples. I video call my daughter and grandkids once a week, which is the highlight of my week. I avoid spending money on anything non-essential. I am content in a resigned, sort of way. I'm not happy. I'm not living the life I dreamed of. But I'm surviving, and that's more than some guys in my situation can say. I've made peace with the fact that the warm beach retirement I envisioned will never happen, that I'll probably die in Alaska, that my golden years will be spent working part-time to make ends meet rather than enjoying the freedom I spent 35 years working toward. I do know now that my wife, she is still my wife on paper, is still living in the Philippines. Through mutual contacts, I heard she's still with her boyfriend in the Ayala condo I bought for her. She tried to start some kind of online business that failed. The condo is apparently in disrepair because she can't afford the association fees on her boyfriend's inconsistent income. The car I bought broke down, and she couldn't afford to fix it properly, so it sits unused. She would have been in a lot better position if she'd just been honest with me, if she'd treated me with basic respect, if she'd actually tried to build a real partnership instead of running a long con. But she didn't, and therefore, she's not. I take no pleasure in her struggles, but I also don't feel any sympathy. She made her choices. The Philippines itself is a beautiful country, and I'm sure, in fact, I'm guaranteed that there are real and genuine people there, and there are genuine relationships between foreigners and Filipinos. I saw plenty of happy mixed couples, people who'd been together for decades, relationships that were clearly based on real love and respect. But there are also people like Loretta who view foreign men as walking ATMs, who will say and do whatever it takes to extract maximum money before moving on to the next target. I'm not saying everybody's like that. In fact, I know most people aren't. But the prevalence is high enough that you need to be extremely cautious, especially if you're an older man with savings looking for companionship in Southeast Asia. I'm telling this story because I want other people out there, other guys out there, to know what can happen. How easy it could be to lose so much money when you think with, let's just call it your heart instead of your head. I didn't think I was naive. I was a grown man in his late 50 seconds. I thought I knew better. But I got played right from the start just as easily as anyone else. The specific warning signs from my story that others should watch for. Requests that escalate over time. It started with $300, month, then emergencies, then major purchases. If the requests keep growing and you're always being asked for just one more thing, you're being tested to see how much you'll give before pushing back. Being unreachable during solo trips. When your partner suddenly can't be contacted when they're away from you. When excuses pile up about why calls weren't answered or messages weren't read. There's a reason. Trust that instinct. Pressure to put property in their name, who legitimate legal reasons. Why foreigners can't own certain property in the Philippines. But that doesn't mean you should do it. If you can't own it legally, don't buy it. Rent instead. Protect yourself. If you see your partner becoming distant after marriage, after major financial commitments, after you've invested heavily, don't make excuses for it. Don't rationalize it as cultural differences or adjustment periods. Pay attention and protect yourself before it's too late. Don't buy property in someone else's name, no matter how married you are or how much you trust them. Don't ignore warning signs because you want the relationship to be real. And most importantly, don't let guilt and emotional manipulation override your basic common sense about money. 2.5 years ago, I thought I was building a comfortable retirement with someone who loved me. I thought I'd finally found warmth, companionship, respect, everything I'd been missing in my life in Alaska. 2.5 years later, I'm back where I started, just significantly poorer and older and more cynical about love and relationships. I've seen so many people since 2019 go to the Philippines or enter relationships with Southeast Asian women with all the best intentions in the world, believe they've found genuine connection, and end up in exactly the same situation I did, and they're the ones who have to pick up the pieces of their destroyed finances and broken trust while the women move on to the next target. The fact that I still have my pension and didn't lose literally everything, that I'm not homeless or completely destitute, that's got to be good enough for me. I compare myself to guys who lost more, who got trapped in worse situations, who never made it home, and I tell myself I was lucky. It doesn't feel lucky, but objectively, it could have been worse. The Philippines was the country that I always dreamed would be my retirement paradise. It was a country I wanted to spend my final decades in, warm and comfortable and happy. And I thought Loretta was the partner who would share that life with me. I quickly realized that my dream was based on fantasy, that the warmth I was looking for wasn't available for purchase no matter how much money I spent, and that some people see foreign retirees as nothing more than funding sources for their real lives. I thought I married her after 3 months because we had a real connection, because age didn't matter, because love conquered all the practical concerns. But what actually happened was, I got conned by someone who was very good at her job, and she systematically extracted $200,000 from me while maintaining a separate relationship with her real partner the entire time. Just make better decisions than I did if you want to avoid the same outcome. Be careful, guys. The woman who seems perfect, who overlooks your age and appearance, who seems content with so little at first, might be playing a long game you don't even know you're part of until it's far too late to protect yourself. I hope my story acts as a warning, because I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone.